All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the current webinar series. I have 2 o'clock on my clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who are new, the current webinar series is a webinar series hosted by the North Central Region Water Network. We are a 12-state extension-led collaboration working to support water professionals and ensure safe and sufficient water supplies throughout the North Central region and beyond. This webinar series is now this 2025 will make its 11th year. Each month we feature a different water related topic and feature 3 speakers on related to that theme. And this month we're going to be talking about boosting climate smart ag implementation. Climate smart, that term has been around. I did a little bit of searching and found that maybe its first occurrence was around 2010. However, I think in the last 5 years, we've heard a lot more about it and a lot more thinking about the things that we're currently doing and focusing on climate smart or reframing those as climate smart. So we're going to be talking about 3 programs looking at boosting climate smart ag implementation across the North Central region and beyond. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items for you. There will be a Q&A session. We are featuring 3 speakers today, and there will be a Q&A session after all 3 speakers. So please put your questions for the speakers in the Q&A panel. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. We do have a chat feature as well, and that's a great place to post links to resources or to introduce yourself to other folks on the call. Or if you're having any technical difficulties, you can note those in the chat and we'll try to troubleshoot those. But please make sure that if you have any questions for our presenters, you put those in the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure to get those at the Q&A portion. You can also upvote other questions. So if you see a question in the Q&A panel that you have a similar one, make sure to upvote that. We'll take those questions that are the most popular or the most upvoted first during the Q&A portion. Just a note about the Q&A today, our first speaker cannot stay for the Q&A portion. So please put your questions in the Q&A panel right after his talk or during his talk, and he'll try to answer as many of those as possible in written form before having to hop off today. If you are having any issues with audio, there is a phone-in option that can be accessed by clicking the up arrow on the mute icon and then clicking switch to phone. And as always, these webinars are recorded. We will post the recording of the webinar as well as the PowerPoint presentation slides on our website, northcentralwater.org. On that website, we also have a webinar archive where you can see our webinars from the past decade. All right, let's jump into this. Who are we featuring today? I'm excited to have 3 great speakers. First up is going to be Dave Gustafson. He is with CTIC, and he's going to be talking about the OPTIS program, looking at monitoring the adoption of conservation practices and climate smart practices through remote sensing data. As a reminder, that presentation, Dave cannot stay for the Q&A, so please make sure to put your questions in the Q&A panel early for him, and he can respond to those written. Then we're going to have Suzanne Rees. She's going to be talking about a climate smart commodities program that she's a part of that's led out of Virginia State, but also involves Minnesota, where she serves on the Minnesota Board of Soil and Water Resources, as well as North Dakota and others. And then Monica Jean is with Michigan State University and with the North Central Climate Collaborative and Climate Ready Midwest, which is a project that's a partnership between the Midwest Climate Hubs and Extension. And she's going to be talking about a new tool to help farmers assess their climate risk. So 3 different approaches to climate smart agriculture, and I'm excited to feature all 3 of them here today. First up, we have Dave. Dave has a long career as an adjunct faculty member, as well as currently serving as the project director for CTIC, the Conservation Technology Information Center. And you can read his full bio here with much of his work since retiring from Monsanto in 2014. But we're excited to have Dave here talking about OPTIS and some of their work doing tracking of climate smart conservation practices. So Dave, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Anne, and thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. I apologize up front. I'm fighting off a bit of a cold here, but hopefully it won't interfere too badly. Um, Let me get my slideshow view going properly. I hope that is showing up okay for everyone. So again, I'll be speaking about Optus, which is a system that is based on satellite based information to track the adoption of climate smart practices. So for those who don't know CTIC, we've been around for quite a long time. I guess that's 43 years now, a member-based organization. I first became aware of it shortly after I joined Monsanto back in 1985 as a source of information on the adoption of conservation tillage. In fact, the CTIC was originally called the Conservation Tillage Information Center and was a project hosted by NACD, for those of you who know the National Association of Conservation Districts. So it's been around for a really long time and has been a trusted source of information and continues to be so. So the partners on this particular project are Regrow, which is a company that used to be called Applied Geosolutions, and then Dagan, and then Regrow as of several years ago. And we've been partnering with them and with the Nature Conservancy for about 15 years now on the development of the Optus data set that I'll be talking about today. And this has been a long project with lots of co-sponsors over the years. I think I've captured most of them on this screen. Of course, Monsanto itself doesn't exist as a separate company anymore, but many other companies, as well as foundations and some government agencies, including both NASA and USDA, have invested in the development of the technology. This technology was developed by scientists at Regrow. Optus stands for the Operational Tillage Information System, and is based on the use of publicly available satellite data, and it monitors the adoption of both various forms of tillage, as well as the presence or absence of cover crops. One of the nice things about the Optus data set is that it's at the field scale and is longitudinal. That is, it goes back to the same field year after year, making multi-year products possible. And all the calculations within Optus are done at a very small scale, 30 meter. However, the information are aggregated so that what we release to the public fully respects grower privacy. And all the data that I'm talking about right now are available at ctic.org/Optus, everything that we're talking about. So you can look at it there. How does it work? Many of you may be aware that the use of satellites to track vegetation health has been an active area of research at NASA and elsewhere, probably going all the way back to the 1960s and 70s when Landsat first went up. But essentially, what happens is that you're able to use certain bands of the Landsat data set to detect the presence of actively growing vegetation and separate it from bare soil. And in the case of cover crops, there's a distinctive signature, obviously, that would pop out as time goes by, as those cover crops begin to grow across the field. The trick here is distinguishing that, obviously, between weeds and other things that might be growing at that period of time. And that's where it does become challenging, and you do need accurate information, ground truthing data, in order to verify that the calculations are so. This has been a huge emphasis for the folks at Regrow over many years, collecting a lot of ground truthing data. But there's probably an opportunity, well, I know there's an opportunity to enhance the size of this data set. And there's conversations about continuing to collaborate with a number of others on this topic, one of which is a meeting that I'm going to mention right at the end of my comments here this morning. So anyhow, there's a lot of data out there showing that we can trust this information. The geographic scope now for the data sets that are available on the website is all lower 48 states. Some of you may be aware that when we first released the Optus information, it was just for the Midwest and then the Corn Belt, but now it is in fact available for the entire country, and not just cropland data, which is what I'm emphasizing here today, but also grassland information, as I'll show in a moment. One of the really interesting things that you can do with the Optus data set is to track the adoption of cover crops over time. And because the data are being generated annually, we're able to get a lot more detailed information about how we're doing across the Midwest with respect to adoption than waiting around every 5 years for the ag census. And so we really do believe it's important to keep this data set going. And as I'll mention a little bit later on, we've entered into conversations with USDA and others about ensuring that these data continue to be made available to the public on an annual basis. But as you see here, there's quite good agreement between Optus 4.0, which is the version that's currently on our website, and the data that are coming out of the Ag Census, and this big question mark as to where we're going to be going over the next several years with all the huge investments that have been made into the adoption of climate smart practices through the various federal acts that you're all aware of, the IRA money, the Climate Smart Commodity Projects, as well as the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And then, of course, that doesn't even mention all the things that are happening with the states and at the private sector to try to drive adoption, which still has a long ways to go, as I think most folks in this call know. But the Optus data set is helpful, and obviously in terms of showing us exactly where in the country adoption is lagging and where more effort is needed to encourage farmers to use these practices, which have all sorts of environmental benefits, including obviously towards water quality. So the data that are available currently on the website are listed here. We have these two data sets, actually, as I alluded to, the croplands data as well as the grasslands data. I'm not going to go into all the detail today, but we also have available on our website the results of DNDC biogeochemical modeling, which are based on using the Optus estimates as input. And therefore, we can come up with numbers for soil organic carbon, methane, and nitrous oxide. And all of these are at the spatial resolution, in the case of the cropland data, at either Huck 8 watershed scale or at the crop reporting district scale, which is typically a handful of counties. There's usually around 9 or so crop reporting districts in each of the states. And that's the spatial resolution that's available on the website. If folks are interested in finer resolution data, they would definitely need to contact Regrow directly, and the instructions for doing that are on our website, although I'd be happy to put you in touch myself if you'd like. And then again, I'm not going to talk about it a lot today, but we have these grazing lands data, which are primarily looking at net primary productivity trends, similar sorts of spatial resolution on that data, and also looking at various kinds of categories for grasslands. And so this information is a great interest to folks who are looking at grazing land health when it comes to livestock. So just as an example of the visualization tool, this is the sort of information that you'll see when you'll go on to the website. Generally speaking, the way the data are presented is a time series on the left-hand side of the screen, and then a map on the right-hand side of the screen. And everything is clickable. You can zoom in and change data layers, et cetera, to your heart's content. I won't go in and do a live demo today, but would be happy to help anybody who would like to have more of a description of what's available there. So just very briefly then, what's coming next for us? We are still pursuing annual updates to Optus. We submitted a letter to USDA leadership earlier this last year, April of 2024, co-signed by a bunch of stakeholders from a variety of places, including state agencies. And we're still in conversations with USDA on that. But in the meantime, we're also now talking to EPA leadership about co-convening a workshop to be held just before the next hypoxia task force meeting, which last I heard is going to be in Washington, D.C. in May. Although who knows, perhaps Ottawa or Nuuk, Greenland are now in the running. That's supposed to be a joke. So anyhow, with that, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. My contact information is here. These slides will be made available to anybody who wants them afterwards, and I will monitor the Q&A conversation that's going on online here and answer any questions that you pose. And I apologize that I was unable to stay a little bit later for the full Q&A session. But thanks again. Thanks so much for your attention, and look forward to conversing with you online.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate that. Looks like we do have some questions coming in. So Dave will be able to stay and answer some of those before running off. So please continue to put those questions in for David, and he'll answer those as he's able. And we'll discuss them during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentations. Okay, so next we're gonna move to Suzanne Rees. Suzanne is a special projects coordinator with the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, Bowser as it's often called. And Suzanne has been a part of the Alliance to Advance Climate Smart Agriculture, Climate Smart Commodity Grant. So I'm excited to have her here. She's been as a part of that group since the application phase in 2022 to talk a little bit about them and what they're doing to boost climate smart agriculture implementation. So Suzanne, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, well, like Dave, I am getting over a cold. Everyone has a cold, or they will have a cold, or they're getting over one. Let me try to share here. I also have a cat that wants to join the meeting. Okay, so there we go. And now I'm going to go into presenter mode, so I won't be able to see anything else, but I will continue from here. So the Alliance program, as Anne-Marie said, it originally started as a program called RIPE, Regional Investment to Protect the Environment, around 2021-22. It was one of the applicants for the initial round under the Climate Smart Commodities program, and was awarded, about $80 million. That was in the fall of 2022. Here we are at the beginning of 2025. But the concept remains the same concept, that if you can pay for all the environmental services that are being delivered through conservation practices, you will attract a lot more practitioners and producers to engage in those practices, and ideally there will be a greater consumer willingness to pay for those practices through various climate smart labels. The part that we are working on is really on the producer end, the supply end. It's a complicated program. I mentioned that it was started under the auspices of the RIPE organization. They ultimately decided that they're more of an advocacy group rather than a sort of grants management group. And so they handed it off to Virginia Technical University in Blacksburg, Virginia, as the fiscal manager and prime grant recipient. And ultimately recruited 4 states to participate, including Minnesota, along with Arkansas, North Dakota, and Virginia. So pretty diverse collection of states. In Minnesota, our agency, Bowser, is the state pilot implementer. We subcontract directly with the Minnesota Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts to do some of our training and outreach work, and to they've provided a lot of that work. And then we also recruited, I'll get into the process in a minute, but we've partnered with, actually it's 8 districts, six soil and water conservation districts encompassing 8 actual counties, because a couple of them are 2 district partnerships. And their role is to recruit and enroll and verify the practices. Then the funding for the practices comes directly to producers through Virginia Tech. There are also a host of national partners working on various aspects of the program. And in Minnesota, we have about 6 other partners doing various aspects, and they have direct contracts with Virginia Tech. So it's complicated. That's one of the both the pros and the cons of the program. From the Minnesota perspective, this is kind of what it looks like. And I mentioned the payments. The payments are a flat rate of 100 per acre or animal unit. Um, each producer or entity can sign up to 2 bundles of farm numbers. These are under the SFA farm numbers with a maximum of 160 acres or animal units in each one. So for a total of 320. And here you can see the eligible practices. There's crop practices, there's livestock practices. The practices do follow the NRCS practice standards, but there are some important differences in how those standards are conveyed and expressed and kind of agreed to by the producers. So the key players in the process have been these SWCDs. They do the outreach to the producers, they support the application process, they support the enrollment process. 10% of the producers are supposed to be identified to participate in the Comet Farm reporting tool. Everyone needs to use the Comet Planner reporting tool, but that will be coming a little bit later in the process. And that's part of that whole reporting piece, which again, that will be coming a little bit later in the process for us. Each state is on a slightly different schedule because we all started at different times. And then, of course, a big role is providing technical assistance to the producers. Um, so I'll give you a little snapshot of where we are now, and I'll show you a timeline. We're over a year, about a year and a half into the actual program. We started with a series of training sessions, some of which are with our partners and sub awardees. Many of them are working directly with the districts. They and we provided postcards and social media and news releases and so on, which the districts themselves put out. And to date, there have been a lot of producer outreach events in 6 districts. Going a little further, here are the participating districts. You can see that there's a pretty good geographic distribution. We would have liked to enroll more districts, but we have kind of an issue in Minnesota. It's hard to know if it's probably a good thing to have, but there are a lot of programs right now, and there's a lot of funding coming in for the programs, and many of the districts are so busy with the multiplicity of programs that they have that they were not ready to take this one on. But we eventually did get these 8 counties to participate. Another important aspect of the program is, and I think you'll see this across all of the climate smart commodities projects, is that they really try to prioritize inclusion of the underrepresented. Historically underrepresented, of course, is the sort of acronym for those producers. And that includes a pretty broad range: socially disadvantaged, BIPOC, limited resource, veterans, women owned, etc. Um, and what those producers receive is they receive a higher payment and also a minimum payment to the really small operations. The goal is for 40% of the participants across all 4 states to be in that underserved category. And I mentioned there's a number of Minnesota partners. We have a couple of equity partners who are taking on much of the work of outreach to those producers, Sustainable Farming Association and Renewing the Countryside. And let me know how I'm doing on time, because I can't see that. This is a timeline that kind of it's a little bit complicated, but on the other hand, it's highly simplified. We started back last winter giving out grants to the SWCDs, soliciting their involvement. We put out an RFP, began doing the outreach, and we finished our first application period. That was application period one, started in mid-July, mid-August of last year. Um, and now they're in the subsequent process of the producers have been selected, and now they're getting into the implementation phase. Right now we're in the middle of application period 2, and that will continue with implementation starting hopefully this spring. And then we anticipate a third and final application period starting in late spring, with the implementation continuing through 2026. The pilot it's a pilot program, and it's supposed to end in September of that year. However, we've heard that there's a possibility it may be extended, what they call a no-cost extension, for another year. So it really does take a long time to start everything up. Um, and I will show you a little bit about what was requested in terms and what was awarded in that first round. The total for Minnesota for producer payments is around 15 million, of which we as a state, Bowser is contributing over 2 million from some of our soil health funds. And we're trying to break it out so that we have maybe 40% expended in application periods 1 and 2, and the remaining 20% in application period 3. So this was what was requested in terms of acreage and what was funded. These are the practices that were requested. Again, this is what was requested. And you can see cover crops really lead the pack in terms of interest, but there's also a lot of interest in nutrient management. Um, Let's see. And then this is what was selected. These are the practices that were selected in terms of both acres and animal units. Um, Again, the greatest number in and acreage in cover crops, a small amount of conservation crop rotation, a lot of interest in nutrient management, and that's especially in those southeastern counties where that actually aligns. That part of the state has had a lot of concern and issues about high nitrate levels in groundwater and drinking water. So the idea of nutrient management, both for fertilizer and manure, resonates and matches very well with those concerns. We're just having it's a question of finding the staff and the resources to get those nutrient management plans completed. And then you can see the others are all taking smaller percentages of the project. Um, I mentioned the goal was 40% of the producers would be the historically underserved. What the way Virginia Tech runs the program, they have a lot of sort of research objectives that they need to maximize. So they won't accept 100% in any round. We kind of negotiated for an acceptance rate for round 1 of 75%. And it was roughly the same across both pools. We may try to increase the rate of acceptance of the sort of historically underserved in the second and third rounds. Um, but most of those producers fall into the kind of veteran, women owned, and small producer pools. It's been a little bit more difficult to find that kind of socially disadvantaged, limited resource category. And that a lot of that is because of just the demographics of the farming population in Minnesota, and because a lot of the people who fit into that category are still seeking access to land. That land access is a huge problem in terms of equity issues in the upper Midwest. And I will wrap up here just by going over some of the opportunities and the challenges, the pros and cons. The challenge, it's a new program, and it's being under the auspices of USDA, not NRCS. So people who are familiar with NRCS programs still find that it's a steep learning curve. The practice standards for each practice kind of parallel those, are supposed to be consistent with the ones in NRCS, but they're in a different format. They have their own worksheets. Um, there are a lot of reporting requirements that are different. And this is more of a challenge for district staff than it has been for the producers. From the producer end, you can see under opportunities, it's a relatively simple payment structure. More of them, they have a higher chance of acceptance, at least right now, than they do for many NRCS programs. Um, and but getting back to the challenges, the district staff have a lot on their plates. There are a lot of other programs kind of vying for attention. And as I mentioned, getting sort of outreach and awareness to the historically underserved. Like right now, we're trying to make sure that we include, there are a couple of tribal Dakota communities in a couple of our districts, and we're trying to make sure that we ourselves, Bowser, as a state agency, are appropriately managing the outreach to those communities and try to get some of them involved. Um, One other advantage, though, is, as I said, having a lot of other funds available. Um, there are, we received state funds for increasing staffing capacity across all of the agricultural districts in the state. Um, we received, and that was about 17 million. We received an RCPP from USDA of about 25 million to mainly focusing on practice implementation, and that is just now coming online. So the advantage of getting the new producers in the door is that then you can refer them to other programs, or if they apply to this one and they're not accepted, you could refer them to other programs. So it's expanding the audience for a lot of these practices, and so we see that as a real positive thing. And I will stop there, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Computer's taking time to think. I'm seeing some questions come in, which is great. So please go ahead and continue to put those in the Q&A panel. All right, so next we're going to transition to Monica Jean. Monica Jean is a field crops educator with Michigan State University Extension. She's also a PhD student, as she notes here, and she's also works multiple times with our multi-state groups, including the North Central Climate Collaborative, and is a key partner of the North Central Region Water Network. So excited to have Monica on here and talk specifically about a project the Climate Ready Midwest Project has been putting together that helps farmers assess their climate risk. So I'll turn it over to you, Monica. I am not able to hear you right now.
Oh,
Oh, there you go.
uh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I don't know. All right. Thank you, Anne. And with that kind of introduction, if you are wondering how much I sleep, not that much. So no big deal. I have a toddler that trained me for me going back to school. So yes, my name is Monica Jean, and I'm a field crops educator first and foremost, based out of the Central Lower Peninsula of Michigan. But I also enjoy serving on the North Central Climate Collaborative with Anne and working with the Soil Health and Ecosystem Ecology Lab at MSU for my PhD. All right, so I'm gonna try to get through this so we can get to a good Q&A session. I'm sure you guys all have lots of questions. I want to say that this group came together, and I will go through who's all entailed in that and include a website you can go to and learn about our team. But what we were really trying to capture or concentrate on is this adaptation area of this graph you'll see here. And so I love soil, and I think it holds many solutions and secrets for us to learn and hopefully use with our farmers. And when we look at the capacity currently across our landscape, at least this is very true for Michigan, adaptation is the low-hanging fruit for us to impact both that depleting pool of organic matter and improving our soil structure, so that we can work on minimizing the harmful effects of climate change. And so, as we were assessing and looking at what's out there on adaptation resources for farms in the North Central region, a cause or a movement was formed to create an assessment like the one I will be looking at with you today or showing you. So, there are, I call them like sister grants going on right now. So the Climate Ready Midwest is pictured there in the middle, but there are other projects going on. We, in our North Central region, we do communicate and collaborate as much as possible, and we are aware of each other's work and are trying to share and be as collaborative as we can be. But a lot of this funnels through the Climate Hub grants, and working with the North Central Climate Collaborative is really what's made it possible, bringing together people and making these partnerships and successfully acquiring the funds to do this work. So if you love doing climate work and you would like to join, please take a look at the website. I'll have a QR code coming up. So today, as I go through the assessment, what I really would like for you to see in this assessment is what can you do with this assessment? If you work with farmers directly, what can they do with the assessment? And then I will talk some about how I use the assessment. Typically, when I do talk about the assessment is often in conjuncture with other like agronomic recommendations that I'm giving. And I don't cover policy. So in addition to giving a talk that may cover climate change, trends, assessment of risk, and agronomic solutions, I often give it with a colleague who gives like a policy update along with that. And so here is the Climate Ready Midwest website. I can paste it into the chat as well, or if Anne can, quick. But that will give you the overall structure and what this group is doing, because there's other parts to this grant besides what I am doing with this assessment and the team. But we're really looking to empower professionals to lead climate-informed ag programming across Midwest. And this fits well within the climate smart ag work that our other panelists have spoke about today. All right. Oh, I went the wrong way. Ooh, there we go. So Aaron Wilson is the PI who was able to get the funding secured for this assessment. And how this and I am also getting over a cold. And how this assessment really came down is that we first developed the field crop one, and then the fruit one, and then we've recently added and are just getting on final reviews with professionals throughout the North Central region for our swine and dairy assessments. So although many of these did come out of MSU, eventually they grew and we're reviewed by professionals and farmers alike across the North Central region. This is what the front page looks like of the website when you are to get on and see the first thing you see. As you scroll down, the next thing you're going to see is we actually really tried to capture stories from farmers in our North Central region. What we are trying to do here is have a level of storytelling. So when a farmer gets on, they can find this relatable. They understand maybe how other farmers have utilized this tool, but a lot about the practices that they have adopted to help improve their farm's adaptation capacity. Another part of the tool here, you'll go to the side. If you scroll down, it's also at the very bottom of the page, but to quickly access it, up in the top here is the assessment where you see fruit farm, field crop farm, dairy farm, and swine farm. This is just an idea. These are the categories that are the main categories within the field crop and the fruit. When it switches over to animal production, as you may kind of assume, there are very different categories. Some are the same, like long-term, short-term, weather, and also farm safety and stress. Some of them are very different, like animal husbandry and care. So I'm going to use the field crop example throughout this one. And so we ask them questions within each one of these categories: tracking weather, short-term, long-term, soil characteristics like moisture management, nutrients, pest pressure, integrated pest management. And then we're also trying to understand what their financial risk and their farm stress is. I often get asked why we include stress and farm safety. frequently our farmers communicate, I think, with some of us that work directly with them, that the weather is very stressful for them. It's unpredictable. So we've just made a conscious effort of including that, since we do know that the suicide rate for farmers is 3.5 times that of our population. And so we're just really mindful and like to include that in there as well. So this is how every section's kind of set up when they open up. So the tracking weather pops up. The first questions asked is whether they prioritize that section or not. That will come into play later in the matrix, because if they don't prioritize it, even though they may be higher risk in that area, it won't come to the top. The ones that they both prioritize and are of higher risk is that cream that will come to the top with the management suggestions that go along with it. They will be able to see that they're high risk and that they didn't prioritize it as much, and maybe that will help them prioritize it. But we did want to kind of get at the low-hanging fruit, and so that's why we asked the question in the beginning. You'll see that they can check boxes below for the options. How this works is based on the current body of research. Since to build these assessments, we've done extensive literature searches across the North Central region, is that there is a point system in the background, depending on the ease, economics, and amount of impact a practice has on a farm for climate adaptation. And we've ranked those, and they get a number represented, and that's how it pools in to explain whether a farm is very adaptive with the practice they've developed, or high risk. They haven't done a lot in those categories. What pops up is this risk matrix, where it lets them know that they're higher risk or lower risk, and kind of explain how they get a result that looks like this. It lets them visually know. I think I like this one better than this table, but it lets them know like where they rank it. They find it to be very important, and it's a low risk versus very important. It's a high risk. So this lets them quickly see where these different sections on the farm, where they rank. And then after that, if tracking weather here, when you go back to the risk matrix, you'll see that tracking weather was very important to them, and it popped up as a place with recommendations for them to go. Each one of them would have, like this section on soil type, moisture, and management you see over here in the purple area. That would also pop up with resources. We do have the resources tagged, so if you put that you're from the state of Minnesota, the resources from the state of Minnesota should show up first. If there's no other resources, other state resources will show up after that, or resources that have been tagged as a resource for whole region. There's also an area where you can submit a request for assistance, and we are also adding on a new area. So we have an area where all the resources are also added at a tab on the top of the website. And if you have an additional resource, or would love to like collaborate on it, we are adding in a space that you can actually submit that resource to be added onto the site, because we can't know, even though we've reviewed and asked, we can't know all the resources. So what I want to bring up to everyone is that what you could do with this resource. So within your own job, I go through, actually, if I'm on the phone with a farmer, I might take the assessment myself, walking through the practices. It helps me think of things or places that could be an adaptation, like a cover crop that could touch on several things, right? It kind of lets me know where they're the most vulnerable. Obviously, a farmer can get down and do that themselves. I think if you're new to climate adaptation, it's even a great resource summary for all the practices that are currently like an acceptable adaptive practices for these production systems to review. So a good overall resource for ag professionals in general. I think I'm trying to stay on time for Anne, so I will stop there. And I have questions here, so I'm going to go ahead. Oh, actually, before I forget, I will paste the website into, but here is a way you can scan and get right to the assessment. So as you have questions, if you want to take a look at it, here it is. And I'm going to send my slides to Anne as well for everyone to access it.
Wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate it, Monica. All right, great. So it does look like we have some questions. We'll go ahead and go over those here. Let's see. Let's get started first with those that are the most upvoted. Um, Someone is curious, Suzanne, do the practices need to be new for the producers applying for funds? Ah, the perennial question.
That is the perennial question. Yeah. Um, Technically, it is not. If you're already doing a practice, um, there's a lot of nuance to the question, but generally, if it's not the same practice on the same acres, it can be treated as new. But there is also a lot of nuance about, let's say you're doing cover crops. Maybe you go from a single species cover crop to a sort of multi-species cover crop, and that would be considered an enhancement. And since uh, the time period for cover crops is essentially a what is it called, a practice period of a year, uh, you could apply again the following year for an enhancement of that practice.
Yeah, yeah. But it's not exactly a black and white question, even though we kind of
Right.
use
And you're not supposed to dual enroll in another federal program. But again, if you can sort of frame it as an enhancement to an existing practice, sometimes it is possible. So I don't want to speak out of turn and give you a lot of hard and fast rules, but generally, new practice or new acres is kind of the rule of thumb.
Yeah, okay. That's helpful, but also, yeah, that kind of note there about an adaptation or a changing the practice a little bit there. I'm just gonna read that we did have quite a few questions come in for Dave, and he was able to answer those. So I'm gonna read that for the sake of the recording and for those who might not have seen it in here. Folks are curious if the data can be you know, filtered by state, which it can. So you can filter it for all of Iowa, for example, and look and see that. Jude had an interesting question. Dave on a screen showed the cover crop numbers and how that related to the census of ag. And he's wondering if that spike in 2019 was real because of the extra wetness that year. And or if it was an artifact from extra wetness causing more latent vegetation growth or greenness. And Dave is kind of noting, yes, exactly on the spot, a significant increase that year because of that special NRCS programs that we saw in response to all those prevent plant acres. So that you are seeing that in that 2019 data from Optus as well. I'm going to go back open to the questions here. Is Minnesota working? Are there any large producers based on the acreage farmed enrolled in the program? So I guess the question here is a little bit in terms of you've been doing it for a year and a half now. What type of enrollment are you getting? Are you seeing larger producers being interested? Is it more of those smaller folks that are picking up the program? What are some trends?
That is something where I would need to go back to the data and do a bit more manipulation. I think we have our fair share of larger producers, but remember they're capped at 320 acres.
Mm.
Uh, so if you're a large producer and you have several thousand acres, you're still only doing 320 at a time. But there's a lot of family operations where several family members will apply, and, it kind of cumulatively it may increase. One thing that, some of our staff have said that this is a good thing that the acreage is capped because it brings more small producers in. So I guess you could look at that question either way.
Yeah, interesting. Scott is curious how your program's working with the Minnesota buffer ordinance rule.
Yeah, the buffer law is a completely different law, and it's probably, I'd say, apart from some of our easement work and wetland banking, it's the only program that it's the only requirement or state statute that we directly administer and enforce. And it simply calls for a buffer strip on all public waters or public drainage systems, and the width of the strip varies depending on what that is, an average of 50 feet or 16 and a half feet for the drainage systems. It's been in place since 2015, and compliance is over 99% at this point. But it exists completely independently of this program.
Yeah,
They would still be required to adhere to the buffer requirements.
right, right. Um, all right. Moses is curious, to what extent have you engaged refugee immigrant farmers in your state? Has that been challenging reaching those communities? And Monica, I'd probably say that to you too, if that's something that you've reached at all in Michigan. I don't know if that's specifically for Suzanne or for both of you. You both, I think, talked about a little bit in terms of making sure that you're reaching historically disadvantaged producers.
Well, I can go first. I think that that is one of the big challenges because for a lot of those communities, land access is the real
Yeah.
challenge. And there are some really great examples of sort of collective enterprises like the Hmong American Farming Association, which has a large acreage divided into small plots, but that is in Dakota County, which is not one of the participating counties. I think we did not see as many of those populations in our participating counties. So that is indeed one of the challenges. Providing access to land for those populations and then getting them enrolled in programs. But I know a lot of really great work is happening under other programs. Renewing the Countryside does a lot of that work. There's additional funding from NRCS to recruit more of those small producers. So I can provide some links if anyone is interested.
Great, thanks. Monica, anything to add?
No, I would say, according to Ag Census data, we really don't have, at least in my coverage area, refugee immigrant farmer populations, especially within row crops. And so not something I'm not saying isn't important, just something not in my scope of work. I apologize.
Gotcha. Just noting here another question that came up for Dave that he was able to answer. Dan was curious if cover crop data was available on the Huck 12 scale. So we talked about you can filter by state. Dave is noting that that is available, but not through CTIC. So not necessarily through the Optus login. You'd have to contact Regrow directly for that data. But interesting to know that that is an option if you're on. That's something I've heard a lot about Optus, but never used it personally myself before. If you're on there and can't find the filter that you're looking for, you could perhaps email Regrow and look to see if that's something you're able to obtain. And he did include some of that information there in terms of how to get in touch with them. Another piece for Dave here before we circle back to Monica and Suzanne is Nicole was curious if the Optus is that system relying on AI machine learning to produce the results. And he's saying yes, both of those techniques have been used to increasing degrees. So interesting there. Not sure a little bit more about the details, but I guess it is in the work there. Suzanne, another question for you from Scott. Can you also include soil health analysis by a certified lab in the system?
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite understand that. Is the question whether soil health analysis is a component that can be reimbursed as part of the grant?
Yeah, I mean that's not one of the practices. I'm trying to find, I see
No.
Scott here rose his hand, so I actually might unmute him and see if he could clarify there. Scott, you should be able to unmute and chat if you want to clarify your question here.
Yeah, real quick, Suzanne. Here's the thing. We've been finding a lot of producers who are trying cover crops and they just go to the seed dealer website and start making their own. They don't even know what their soil health is to begin with. And so it just seems to me like, well, in fact, when we do our 319 EPA 319 projects, one of our real high, I guess you'd say highly emphasized suggestions is to have us reimburse or pay for soil health analysis. So I guess my question would be, can you add that to your list so these people know where they're starting out when they're starting in their regenerative agricultural journey?
I think in the case of this particular program, we're somewhat constrained by the list of eligible practices, and that would be kind of an add-on. However, some of the practices do involve a lot of planning
Hmm.
beforehand, like nutrient management planning, for
Right.
example. And nutrient management planning, I am not a technical expert on that, but soil analysis might be included in some of those, but again, it's not a freestanding component. It might be a component of some of the planning that's necessary to implement some of the practices under the grant, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, and
Thanks.
I see my colleague David Wyrens has made a comment. Only as required by a practice standard. Yeah,
Oh, Alliance. Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay,
Thank you.
that's some helpful detail. I appreciate it. Monica, I had a question for you. You know, you've talked about using the climate smart or climate ready farm assessment tool with producers. When you have, are you using the tool with producers because they're specifically asking for it, or is it something that they're looking at risk and you're saying, well, hey, when we think about risk, we're thinking about these kind of climate smart or climate adaptive practices? I think about it in that way. Like, how realistic is it to think that our producers are going to come to us and ask for this? Or is it something that we're responding to what they're saying by saying we have a way to kind of assess this risk? And again, I am not hearing you. Suzanne, are you hearing her?
That's weird.
Now I
Huh.
hear you.
There
It
you
was
are.
the same
Yeah.
thing before.
Is there
Okay,
like a lag? Okay. All right.
try it again.
I talk too fast. I typically, if a farmer contacts me, and what will prompt me to get on and utilize the tool is usually they start talking about carbon markets and like the weather's really hard, and some of these like buzzwords, I guess, in my brain that make me think, oh, let's just kind of walk through what you're doing on the farm currently, and if what's the low hanging fruit. Um, I think that there's practices out there that they may not even be aware could help them mitigate those practices, especially moisture management, both lack of or not enough of. And so kind of going through those parts with them, I think are really helpful. They may not even know, like I said, I use it as a tool to just reference. I may not even say
Yeah.
like you're really high risk in this area, but it's just a tool for me to talk through things with them.
Yeah, okay. That's helpful. And I think also when you're talking about, moisture and either not enough or too much, I think that's again that perennial issue we're having. So that's going to be applicable to a lot of producers. Okay, great. Well, I do know we're at 58, so I'm going to go ahead and end the questions there. But I do know, Dave had to hop off early. So there may still be some questions for him or questions for Suzanne and Monica. So I want to make sure that I provide their emails. So as I note, we did record this session and we will make sure to put the recording up on our website, northcentralwater.org. You can also go on there to find the presentation slides or to access our webinar archive, which has our webinars from the last decade. In the meantime, if you do have questions for Dave, Suzanne, or Monica, I wanted to have their email up there so you can see them. That way, if there was a burning question or if you wanted to get more in touch, you can do so. All right. Perfect. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And we hope to see you in February when we're going to be talking about drainage water management.
Thanks.